feedback from our last conference and those before were accessibility was an issue, timing was an issue, being streamed was an issue, and that actually our academics would like the sessions that we want to go to, they'd like them to be more flexible and certainly more interactive. So as a result of that, this is a pilot in our institution this year and will be evaluated in due course. All of the 18 sessions, there will be either a PowerPoint presentation or a streaming presentation, a live version of it, available in a brochure after the Learning and Teaching Festival. So you may not get anything in the event itself, but there will be a group of materials available afterwards for you. We're not expecting anything disastrous like fire alarms or anything this morning, but you're all staff and I know you all, so you know how to get out of here.
I can see this.
There is the door. Feedback from events like this is always very welcome, and as you can see, we have a very, very small group here this morning. Hopefully there are people joining us on our live streaming, which is going to London campus and across both campuses too. So Corony may make reference to the people out in the ether. So without further ado, I would like you to introduce you to our first guest speaker. Corony Edwards is an independent consultant, but only a very recent independent.
Yeah, since January.
Oh, you're my word.
Yeah, it does.
Having spent a long career in higher education at Birmingham University and also Exeter University, a particular academic background in English language.
Yeah, applied linguistics.
And more recently in her career, heading up educational development, if you like, but not an academic developer. So without further ado, oh no, I have a little bit more. The reason for inviting Corony is that you may remember, I know some of you were involved in writing the hefty bid that we put forward last year for Learning Gain. And Corony has access to some of those bids that were actually accepted and now going forward. So because the session is based around Learning Gain and looking at how we measure teaching excellence and what our students gain from their experiences at university, Corony has a particular view, and I'm hoping she will share that with you this morning.
I might ask you to share your views.
Yeah, and pull some stuff from you too. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Corony. Be aware that there's live streaming, and I hope you enjoy the session.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah, for the warm welcome. I don't know about you, this to me sounds quite loud. Can we, yeah, he's heard that. Yeah, that sounds better. It sounds a bit more natural now. Lost the echo. Anyway, thank you very much for the warm welcome. Thanks all for coming in on what appears to be winter's morning again, although the sun's nice and bright out there. Hope you'll enjoy this morning's session. There's some bits of input from me. There's quite a bit of activity from you. The way I've structured it is for the first roughly hour, we're going to alternate between input and short activities. And then for the last part of the session, I've got a slightly more extended activity for you. And those of you who were involved in writing your bid for the HEFKE Learning Gain projects in particular, it's a chance for you to revisit some of those ideas in the light of some of the new material that's come out, and perhaps have a think about how you might take that forward. So I hope by the end of the session you'll have something genuinely useful that you can take away and build on later as well. So very briefly then, some objectives for today. To think about what Learning Gain actually means, some definitions, to think about why this is going on. You might have some good ideas about why this is going on at the moment already. To have a look at some of the types of measure used to measure learning gain. And those of you involved in the bid, you may well have already familiarised yourself with some of the key parts of what's known as the RAND report. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Not that you're admitting at this stage. So we'll have a look at that as well. To have a little preview, and this is a sort of really quite privileged preview of some of those HEFKE projects. HEFKE were very reluctant to give me, well, they weren't reluctant, they were unable to give me information. They've got a very small team supporting these projects and they just haven't been able to get much up on their website. but I did manage to ring round a few contacts, and I've managed to get a bit of information about what they're doing, which is quite interesting. And then to give you some time to have a think about what your views are and where it's all going. So that's what we're going to try and do this morning. Does that sound okay to you? It's what you were expecting. I always dread that somebody's going to shake their head at this point in time. So there we are. And I said it was going to be interactive, so we're going to start straight away with an activity for you to warm you up a bit. Starting off just thinking on your own, but as soon as you've got some ideas, you can start comparing notes with someone sitting near you. And this is thinking about, just in a very unstructured way, what people might gain from higher education. And in particular, what did you learn at college or university? Now, this isn't an invitation for any embarrassing personal revelations about some of the more interesting things you learned. But do think broadly about this, not just what it was that allowed you to pass your finals exams. Think about the other things that that university experience afforded you and that turned you into the graduates that you were when you left university. And if you could use the big pens, because we're going to put these up on the wall later. Write them down on your yellow post-it notes. Just chuck out quite a lot to start with, and as soon as you've got some ideas, start comparing notes. Any of them which you then think were really, really important to you, and I don't mind why you think it was important, but it could be because it was something that later in life turned out to be a key attribute, skill, knowledge that was helpful to you. Put a star by those top ones for you, okay? So work on your own, then compare notes. Whoops, went on too fast there. And you've got up to 10 minutes. If you don't need 10 minutes, we'll stop early, okay? I'm assuming you know each other, but if you don't, now would be a good time to introduce yourselves to the people sitting next to you. If you've got a very long word, you can stick two post-its together. If anybody is listening to us remotely, you can jot this down on a bit of paper for yourselves now. Just because you haven't got yellow post-its doesn't mean you can just have a little snooze now. You can join in. Good morning, folks. You've picked a very good moment to come because we're just doing an activity, so please come down and join us, and you can make a new group down at the front. Not getting away with sneaking in at the back. There's plenty of room in the front row down here if you'd like to come down to this one. Welcome. Did you manage to get yourselves a cup of coffee or anything? You're all right, are you? Okay. We've really literally just started. I've just shown some objectives and launched straight into this little thinking activity, asking people to think about what they learnt at university. So you can see the instructions up there, and I'll give you a set of pens. And as I said, we're not asking for embarrassing personal revelations. But it's more than just what was in the formal curriculum. So. And I'm Corony, by the way, as you've no doubt guessed. There you go. Hello. There are seats down at the front here, reserved for you. This group could do with another member, I think, so would you mind shuffling along and then you can... Sorry, just when you've got comfortable. They'll explain what they're doing if the slide's not clear.
Were you going to say what we learned as lecturers?
No, as an undergraduate.
All right, so from your university.
So think back to your university days, yes. And nothing too specific or technical.
Right.
So I don't know what your subject was, but we don't want the sort of discipline-specific jargon words, but you might phrase things in general terms, like, critical thinking or argumentation or, whatever it is. Yeah. Actually, it's quite interesting, quite a few people pausing and thinking quite hard. And I don't know whether that means that it's difficult to remember what you learned that was useful. It was a long time ago, yes. Or just that it's a bit early on on a Tuesday morning. How are you doing, folks? Do you want a bit longer? Still writing going on. Don't forget to put some stars on the ones that you think are particularly important. Hello, welcome. I'll explain these in a minute. This is for presently, I'll explain them later, okay? That's for in a moment. That's for you in a moment. That's for you in a moment. There's some more to go up that way. And that'll be for you in a moment. Right, folks, I think we should I think we should move on from this. I've put some more coloured post-its around. I'll explain those in just a moment. If things come to mind in the next few minutes that you want to add to, keep on putting things on your yellow post-it notes, keep adding stars. Keep them safe because we're going to use them a little bit later, okay? So, moving on then. This, I said, was a very loose activity just based on you thinking about what did I learn, what was the point of my university education. I'm going to show you now a couple of definitions of learning gain that have appeared in the grey literature, really, in higher education in the last few months in this country. There's one on the HEFKI website. And it talks about knowledge, skills, work readiness, and personal development. And employability is a theme that looms large right from the start here. And it's something you might not have seen if these definitions had been written, say, 20 years ago. Certainly, I think the concept of what higher education is for has shifted quite a bit. And then there's another one that's a little bit more open, I think, from the RAND report that I mentioned earlier, more of which later. I'll explain the provenance of that later. So it's a kind of, to put it very crudely, a before and after measurement of what people have got from their time in higher education across a number of dimensions. But it's certainly a lot more than the content knowledge and the discipline-based skills that we measure in our final examinations and in our assessments of students' degree attainment. Okay, now you'll understand what the next lot of coloured post-it notes are for. Now you've had a glimpse at a formal definition of learning gain. I asked you to think about what you learnt at university. What I'd like you to do now is switch your focus to what some of the other stakeholders currently might want from graduates coming out of, and Sunderland University is as good example as any to pick. So, you know, what's the government looking for from graduates? How about employers? Your university leaders? Do we have anybody from this leadership team here? Okay, so you might have some insider information on this. And whether you're allowed to reveal it or not, of course, is another matter. And I've said all others because you might be able to think of some other stakeholders, but I thought for me those were some of the most important ones. But one actually that's not up there at all is students. What do students want to get? So if you'd like to use the orange to put down some student views of what you think they want out of their university education, you can do that. And you'll know which of those stakeholders you're focusing on because you will only have one colour post-it note in front of you. So you don't have to do them all, just focus on the one that matches your colour. It says blue up there, in fact it's a kind of mauvey colour. So if you've got the orange ones, you can focus on students and anybody who's not one of the other groups. If you've got green post-it notes, think about what you think the government wants. All right? So rather than try and cover them all in the next 5 minutes, if you could just focus on your stakeholder. And again, jot down some of those learning gains or outcomes that you want to see in graduates. This time you've just got 5 minutes. Is anybody not sure about which group they are, what they're doing? You want some orange ones? Yes, do pass more orange ones around if you would like to add some. I'll give everybody some orange ones because if that's what you're interested in, that's fine. All right, just in case you have some ideas for others. Sorry. They're blue. I know, I didn't see the post-it notes until I arrived, so I beg your pardon. They look sort of bluish on the website. Yes, actually the colour on the slide looks some orange in case you want to do some. Do you want some of those in case you have some other stakeholder ideas? No, I'm fine, thank you. Yeah. What I was going to do was just pull off some of the these sheets, or one in particular, to start with. But I don't know how you're doing, folks, but if you're struggling at all, you might like to have a think about what, if you're familiar with the Sunderland Futures scheme. Any of you know about the Sunderland Futures? What skills and attributes is that trying to develop in your graduates? What's that recognising? And another clue, actually I think I've put these on here now. Whoops, no? Oh no, I know why. This is a slightly different version to the one I updated last night. But the other clue is what it says in your learning and teaching plan, where it talks about some attributes that it wants to develop in your graduates. And if any of you've got web-enabled devices with you, there's nothing to stop you having a quick look up to see those. Encouraging participants to use technology appropriately in learning sessions. So. Okay, I can see groups are kind of breaking out of their colour that they've been given and are beginning to write on some other things. So again, let's move on. If more ideas keep coming, again, you've got spare post-it notes there. Keep jotting them down as we move on. A little bit about some background to the whole story of Learning Gain. When I was preparing for this session, I did some rooting around on the web and Google Scholar and so on. And the earliest reference I found to Learning Gain, and there might be earlier ones, goes right back to 1928, somebody called Thorndike. But it was quite interesting. They were doing a literature survey which suggests that previous work had been done. And they were looking at progress of different types of learners, specifically to see what difference age had on people's capacity to learn. So they weren't looking at learning gain per se, or for the sort of purposes that I think we're currently interested in, but nevertheless there were some measures there. I love the bit about teaching university students to write with the wrong hand and learn Esperanto. Different sorts of experiments in those days. But the point about that really is that those early studies were being done in contexts where the ways of testing and measuring attainment in a particular skill or subject were kind of accepted. Those tests weren't being contested in any way. It was mostly about discipline knowledge or a very clearly definable skill. So they weren't really asking how much of, or what has been learned. They were asking how much has been learned. And they were using Learning Gain just as a means to an end about different methods or techniques of teaching, rather than as a measurement in its own right. But I think it shows how far back we can look into the literature and the research on Learning Gain when we're thinking about this. Round Report, though, makes this point about learning gain within the context of UK higher education and the fact that this has only fairly recently come onto our agendas in any big way. However, and I don't think it'll be on this slide because this is a slightly earlier version, but I did find in your learning and teaching plan a mention of Sunderland intending to measure the value added of its students. And is this happening here? I mean, clearly it was an intention that was expressed in the plan fairly recently, so it may be a work in progress, but does anybody know of work that's going on to actually measure in any way? Yeah.
I don't know about now, but a long time ago when I came here and was teaching French, I remember that we did look at and we encouraged students to look at their A-level results
Yep.
and to see just how far they had travelled.
Yep.
You know, especially when they were getting excellent grades and had come through with barely a pass in their A-levels.
Right.
They ended up with 2-1s, top 2-1s.
And that's interesting because that was at an individual student level.
Yes, we discussed
Yes.
it in class and we
Yes.
asked students to
Yes.
do their own journeys.
I think the shift nowadays is towards measuring at an institutional level, or at least at a discipline level, because it's, as we'll see in a minute, linked to things like funding and so on. So though it hasn't been studied extensively in HE, I think that there have been little pockets of activity going on in different universities, sometimes looking at individual student progress, sometimes perhaps looking at it in slightly larger aggregated groups for quite a while. But I suspect it's been done in a rather intuitive way, and I'm not aware of any earlier systematic studies that have looked at how to measure learning gain in a way that's valid and reliable. Okay, so what do we already know about the UK agenda? Why is all this going on at the moment? And I thought you've probably got some good ideas on this, so rather than me just tell you, and since we're a smallish group, let's do this together rather than in a group. Whoops. So who's driving this and why? Where's all this coming from? Government, yes, absolutely. Yes, yes. And what about how HEIs are being actively involved? I mean, clearly some of you were involved in a bid to HEFCE for some funding to develop a pilot project. What do you know about the outcome of that? The extent to which HEIs are involved? Sarah, do you?
We don't know anything about
Okay.
the outcomes of those pilots as yet. We do know that some of the pilots are ongoing and that HEFCE seem to favour collaborative pilots
Yes.
across sites,
Yes.
which probably put our bid out a bit. But we haven't seen any of the outcomes. We haven't really seen any more detail about what those pilots look like either.
No. And as I said earlier, there's not actually a lot on the HEFCE website. There is a little bit more now if you want to go and have a peep, but it's quite vague and it's difficult to see what's really being looked at.
I think some of it is tied up with the political agenda around tech.
Yes.
Because learning gain and tech are becoming, intertwined.
Yes.
That's not to say that tech is only dependent on learning analytics, but it is to an extent. And of course, the government has an agenda around that.
Yes.
And of course, I think we've all made responses to the Green Paper,
Yes.
and only just recently have they put the technical consultation back on the agenda in a purposeful way, and that was in abeyance for some time. So there's been some torpor at government level, at ministerial level around it, I think, which is slowing down the progress on what is known.
Yes, and I don't know if any of you subscribe to Wonk HE's Monday morning briefing, but it was that came through yesterday that alerted me to a leak that's happened via the Telegraph, which suggests that we know that there's a white paper now doing the rounds, and that the thinking is that that will be announced on or soon after the 18th of May, after the Queen's speech. So we're not very far away. We're only about 3 weeks away from that. So I think we'll know a lot more. But learning gain was mentioned quite explicitly in the Green Paper in connection with TEF, and I'd be astonished if it disappears.
It's about accountability for public money, isn't it?
It absolutely
Right or
is.
wrong, don't shoot the messenger, but
Yes.
that's how they see it.
Yes. it's interesting because I think what's happening with learning gain seems to be following the pattern that we've seen with TEF, where TEF was announced as a Conservative manifesto promise. They were elected with that in their bag of promises. Joe Johnson was then tasked with making it work, and he then began to discover very rapidly that it was a lot more complex than it looks on the surface. And I think the Green Paper consultation put that message through very loud and clear. There were a huge number of responses to that consultation, and BIS did say they were going to systematically go through them all. We don't know whether they did or not, but I suspect they did look at quite a lot of them. And I think the same thing's happening with learning gain. You know, it sounds simple, before and after measure, and then you start these questions about what do we measure. You know, you were pondering how do you actually articulate what those gains were from your university education. I didn't ask, did you all value your university education? If you could turn the clock back, would you not bother? I'm kind of assuming that people got valuable things out of it. But it's not easy. Okay, that's interesting, helpful. I'm going to go through and unpick some of these things a bit more, quoting quite a bit from other people. Round report again, and if you've not seen the Round report, it's well worth reading the executive summary at least. It's quite an extensive executive summary, but it really picks up the key points. The highlights are mine. So you're absolutely right about accountability, evidence of the value of investment, but also making sure that employers are getting what they need from the exit qualifications, the degree classification, and of course the here that students now get. Okay. I said I'd explain a bit more about the Round report and where it came from. I think it's a really interesting and excellent document, actually, and it really brings us up to speed in terms of what the rest of the world have been doing around learning gain. It was commissioned a couple of years ago, a year and a half ago, by BIS and the HEA, HEFCE. It looked at, the brief was to look at a whole range of things and a whole range of purposes for measuring learning gain, which was not just about accountability, interestingly. They looked at how learning gain could be used to inform enhancement, for example. Also, and this features large in the TEF, transparency for students, for prospective students, making sure that what students have in their hands to help them choose the best course of action, course, university for them, is as accurate as possible. And I think there's a feeling that the current KISS data doesn't necessarily do that. A few wry smiles in the room. Okay, so a number of potential purposes there. The report was published, I think it was November last year, so quite recently. And true to their brief, they reported on purposes, on sector views. They interviewed something like 137 institutional representatives who I think in typical academic way were quite uncommittal and said that it could be useful but needed further work. One of the most useful bits for me was this critical overview of the methods, and I'm going to give you a summary of that presently. On a handout. And they also made some recommendations for where to go next in terms of a robust pilot, and that's the pilot, the HEFCE pilot projects that are being worked on now. They recommended more engagement with the sector, so award a big brownie point to yourselves for being ahead of the curve and doing this session today, and to conduct this series of pilots. So, another little time out for you to think. I said that of the 137 institutions who were contacted, the majority said that they thought it could be quite useful. What do you think? Turn to the people near you who you can easily talk to. Just compare notes. On balance, should we or shouldn't we? introduce measures of learning gain for use in UK HEIs. Okay, can I pause you there, folks? Are you ready to vote on this? Who thinks we should develop measures of learning gain? 8, 9, 10, okay. Who thinks we should not develop measures? A couple of people.
Maybe not being able to develop an actual measurement that would reflect the gain and apply that across disciplines. I think practically it's a difficult thing to do.
Yes.
As soon as you start doing that, then you're stepping back to the generic. And if you go so far back generically, then you can't even necessarily describe it properly in terms
you're so right, and this is one of the things that RAND really pulls out, some of the challenges and the criteria that we have to meet if we're going to develop a meaningful measure of learning gain. Would one of the people who very firmly said, yes, we should develop it, like to say anything about why you think we should?
Well, apart from the fact I don't think we've got much choice.
Sorry?
I don't think we've got a lot of choice, to be fair,
Mm.
but it is an agenda. I think it depends. I think there is a caveat though for me, and that is depends that we are being thoughtful about what we're trying to measure.
Yeah.
And that there is I think there is a span of potential things that we could be measuring.
Yeah.
And I suspect that the university would probably want to try and measure some more complex things than perhaps the government and HEFTE would be interested in doing. And I think there's a bit of a matrix there. So I would be much more comfortable with something rounded. I mean, interesting, your earlier slides talked about personal development, for example. And I'm not sure how you begin to build any comparable benchmarkable measure nationally for that, which is what the government will want.
Yes. Some interesting things for me to show you presently about what some of the other pilot projects are looking at and how they're trying to tackle that. I don't think they've solved the issue, but I think they're having a good stab at it. Anybody else like to comment at all on whether we should or shouldn't? Or yes.
I think, in fact, we have to see it from a different perspective in a way that it is actually, it has become a kind of requirements now if you look at the local as well as the global environment because of the competition in the market.
Right.
We have to go for this in terms of all these skills which need to be developed to the students so that tomorrow they are ready to go into the industry.
And to be able to demonstrate that through these measures. Yes. Any other comments at this point? Yes.
In higher education in general, we do use the language of transformation quite a lot.
Yes.
Being transformational. I don't think it's unreasonable as a higher education institution for us to be able to try and evidence those claims.
Yes. Yes. And this is great because you're picking up echoes of some of the things that I'm going to show you in a minute from another writer, somebody called John Rich. I don't know if you've come across his work. A very interesting think piece that he did for one of the HEPI occasional papers, focusing mainly on employability, but he touches on some other aspects of what students gain from university. So we'll move on to that in a second. When we have our... Sarah, were you going to say something there?
Can I just say that
Yeah.
I think it's really important when we're thinking about learning gain that we're really honest as higher education institutions. I think we have elephants in the room across the sector in terms of how we measure student achievement and learning currently. For example, the NSS is one that everybody knows doesn't necessarily work in some aspects, and we need to be really honest about when we're looking at a new measure or sector developments in terms of using metrics, that we acknowledge what is wrong and what works, and that we can stop and change tack if it isn't right, because we don't seem to be able to be responsive enough to do that as a sector.
Yes. And even if we go back to, you know, our mainstay, which is our degree classifications, as you're probably aware, work has been going on for some time to look at using grade point averages as an alternative. But there's no consensus on that, although the government's clearly keen for us to move in that direction as a better differentiation of achievement. But anyone who knows anything about assessing, once you start drilling into the detail of it, knows that at the end of the day, it's normally a very subjective exercise that we put some numerical value to. There are some exceptions to that, but generally speaking, it's very subjective.
So let's not put someone at the top of the league table and someone at the bottom on the subjective measure.
I know, and how do we stop the media in this country doing that? Because I don't think it's the sector that has signed up to league tables at all. They're not driving that.
And I think it also depends on, I mean, the way the problem is measured, it's that word that's the problem, I think,
Yeah.
rather than the learning gain, because yes, it's easy to take a measure of students from an educationally disadvantaged background who've come through with, you know, maybe a third, but that's just fantastic.
Yes.
It's much harder to take the student
And it's, of course, what they've been doing in the school sector for some time.
Absolutely, yes, and Alan was talking about that
Yeah.
in our forum.
Although under the badge of value added, which is slightly different because that's the difference between predicted grade and final achievement, whereas learning gain is about starting point grade and end point grade.
But a lot of that's about things which it is hard to measure.
Yes, absolutely.
It is those intangible things,
Yes.
about confidence and independence and all the rest of it.
Yes.
Which goes back to what Sarah was saying
Yes.
about assessment. We can only assess that up to a point.
Yes. Okay. Sorry, one more comment and then I think we'll move on. And we'll have a slightly longer discussion towards the end, I hope.
I don't know if I understand very well so what is being discussed here, but I think from an epistemological point of view, it's imperative to measure, because criteria may be subjective or objective, but it's important to measure in order to know if learning has taken place. So knowledge can only be assessed with the objective criteria or subjective criteria set, against which we can know if learning has taken place or not. So I think it's important.
It is, but it goes back to one of your colleagues' points that if those measures are not valid, reliable, sufficient, then they're worse than meaningless, actually. They could be quite damaging. So I think that's the bind that we're in, really. We need to do it, but we don't know how to do it adequately.
This presuppose also criteria, evaluation criteria. The validity, of those criteria or the objectivity of those criteria would set also criteria.
Yes. Okay, well, let's move on and have a look at what Rich has to say. He's interesting because he brings another dimension into this, which I think may be dear to the hearts of some people at Sunderland. He talks about knowledge and skills, but he also talks about social capital. And it was the only bit of literature I found that talked about social capital, except, actually, interestingly, the government green paper, which talks quite a lot about social mobility, but it's not clear how that's linked to the teaching excellence framework and learning gain. So I think there's another big glaring gap here, or lack of joined-upness. Bear that one in mind for the activity that I'm going to ask you to do at the end, because again, it's not one that I've seen, and I didn't see all of the HEFCE project outlines, but it's not one that I've seen in the projects that I've looked at so far. Okay, Rich on learning gain and teaching standards. Just let you read that. So he's quite strong on learning gain as being useful for enhancement purposes. And it would be nice if that happened. He also picks up this need to measure impact. And he brings up this austerity agenda and the need to everybody to justify every penny public money that's being spent. And he points out, that I think the point that a couple of people made, that at the moment we don't have that measure. And here he is on that lack of evidence. I like this quote.
That measure, if we wanted to, we have so much data.
Yes.
If we're focusing on, the level the students are at when they come in, if they just want figures.
Yes.
Because all of this, I think, has a value as long as we realise it's very, very approximate and definitely not comparable because of each specific context. But if we want them, we can get them. It feels as though we're wasting so much energy and so much money on renaming things and doing things exactly the same.
Yeah.
Different, in a different discourse framework. And I don't feel
See,
we're moving forward.
I think that's true to some extent, because if you're talking about discipline knowledge and you take A-level scores, your tariff entries, as your baseline, and you look at degree classification for your exit, and there are even problems with that because A-level scores aren't the same as your degrees to some extent. But what do you use as your proxy measures for social capital? You know, how do you quantify that? And I think that's what this debate is beginning to tease out, some of those more abstract, subtler ideas.
I think that's a really good point, that we only know the point of entry for our students from what they bring in terms of academic performance.
Mm.
We don't know what they're like in terms of independence and their ability to reflect and learn on their own. So that on its own makes it very difficult to measure what they come out with and the impact that we have had
Yeah.
through their 3-year experience living,
Yeah.
however long that.
I mean, there is data around social background, and it's been used for quite a while in looking at allocation of widening access funding. So you can look at proxies like postcode of home address, or whether they're first in the family to go to university, for example, but they are proxies. And are they adequate?
Very often the Delhi data is used as the proxy at the other end.
Yes.
Defending that, just saying it's a fact. And if you look at that IFS report that came out
Yes.
a couple of weeks ago about graduate salaries, that's a classic example of putting all of that stuff in a melting pot and stirring it,
Yeah.
and then producing something which purports to have something to do with social capital.
Yes.
I
Well, it's
question whether it does.
Isn't it interesting how the capital bit of social capital becomes earnings? It becomes money. And I picked that up a little bit further on, actually, over the word value as well, that you use these words, and I think sometimes different parts of the, different members of the debate are talking at cross purposes, because there are some people in biz for whom capital and value are purely about money and earnings. And I think we, within the higher education sector, think about value and capital in a much, much broader way, and perhaps money is one of the last things that would be included in those definitions. Okay. Been talking about the teaching excellence framework, and some of you may have had a look at the green paper when it came out and the proposals for this. But just as a brief reminder how learning gain fits in with all this. As you probably know, there's a proposal that the tuition fee caps will rise for people who meet the requirements. For stage 1, for most universities, that's not going to be problematic because it's simply going to take the latest quality review, QAA review, and if that's been successful, then everybody's through. But in time, there will be a TEF 2, and that's, I think, where the learning gain is likely to come in. And you can see in the last bullet point there the quote from the document that specifically mentions learning gain as part of a group of measures. It does fortunately say once they are sufficiently robust, and I think feeling in the room so far is some scepticism as to whether they ever will be. Okay.
Can I ask what
No.
teaching intensity actually means? Does anybody know what it means? Is it purely number of hours contact, or is there something more to it?
It's pretty much contact hours. But I think, again, there's an acknowledgement that teaching intensity is not just about the number of hours students physically spend sitting in the same space as a tutor or lecturer. That a lot of teaching's done online now, for example, that it might be facilitated in other ways.
I think that's one of the really big challenges of the technical consultation paper, this definition of what engagement means.
Yeah.
Because clearly they're trying to cover that with teaching intensity.
Yeah.
Into your question. And I think there's a whole raft of things which underpin what engagement with learning actually means
Yeah.
for a student.
Yeah.
Because provision of learning materials has very little to do with how a student might engage with those.
Yeah. And it's where you see differences across the disciplines. So a student doing a science subject typically has very high-class contact hours recorded because of all the hours they spend in a lab, which is essentially student inquiry with a responsible adult supervising, unlike in a humanities subject where it's safe to let them go and read a book in the library on their own. You know, you could put them all in a humanities lab and get them to, you know. Okay, all right, I take that back. But, you know what I mean.
It's not teaching intensity, it's learning intensity.
Yes, absolutely right. Absolutely right.
What I was trying to observe from here is still very less has been talked about the social transformation.
About, sorry, the?
I mean, in terms of the social capital based
Yes.
transformation. Still, most of it is talking about employability,
Yes.
employment, and
Yes. Yes, and having reread the documents recently, sort of on the back of each other, I do get the impression that every now and then you get a kind of token mention of some of these other things. But for me, it seemed to keep coming back to employability and graduate earnings. Okay. Time to do something more with your post-it notes now. Going back to this sticky question of not what we would want to gain from university, what others would want to see gained from university, but how we actually measure it. And this is to ask you to go back to your post-it notes, have a think about the things that you've written down there, and think which of those ones do we currently measure, and which ones do we not currently measure. We won't have time to discuss in detail now whether they're reliable, valid, consistent, inclusive, and so on, but we have touched on those in some of your comments earlier. And of the things on your post-it notes that are not currently measured, do you think they could be measured? In a moment, I'm going to ask you to go and stick your post-it notes, and there's going to be quite a jumble of them, admittedly, onto this flip chart sheet that I've put up on the wall. I don't know if you can read it from where you are, but you'll have to assign them to one of the 4 quarters of the chart there. The top half of the chart is for all the skills, attributes, knowledge on your post-its to do with your academic studies and your discipline. And the bottom half is to do with the generic or personal attributes that you think you developed. The right-hand side is for all those things that we don't currently measure, and the left-hand side is for the things that we do currently measure. So there should be a quadrant that you can stick each of your notes in. Okay, so have a bit of a think, and as soon as you're ready, please get up, and if you want to pass post-its to the end of the row and get somebody at the end of the row to put them up for you, you can do that. But you'll need to be clear about which quarter you want them to put them in. I'll give you a bit of time to think about this. Right, are you okay with that instruction if I move on to... Okay, so you can see more clearly what's on the chart, so that's what you're going to have to stick them onto. Do you know, when I did this PowerPoint, I had some of these points, you know, that they were meant to come on with each click, and this version of it's just...
there's also this awareness really of the world of what, the world of work really. And one of the things, yeah, when I've been involved with things like employer advisory programs, and they always say actually because they're generalising knowledge of the world of work and what we're going to go and work. So children is interested. So I think confidence and aspiration is important. That's the sort of social thing. But also, as you say, with their quality statements, because it's about their flexibility and their willingness to
You can put things close to the leads. You can, yes.
I think there are issues with many employers have unrealistic expectations about what knowledge because you have working groups, you have team working groups.
Well, in terms of what I gained out, I mean, basically I said I can tell literature.
Yes.
Can go that way.
It's about, sometimes it's about knowing how to approach those books and knowing how to.
Oh no, I really, yeah. I put down the value of self-directed learning and being able to
Which is maybe, but having an analytical approach, when you're going to learn things like how to see the other side of the coin.
yeah, no, no.
That's interesting. I was wondering if we were going to get any in that top right section.
Sorry.
Ah. I was just saying, I was wondering if we were going to get any in the top right.
Which is the top right?
Top
not
right
measured.
is academic and discipline, but not
Yes,
currently measured
yeah.
yet.
No, for me, that's the most important thing.
With your stars on, yeah.
It's what I think is important for my students, especially PhD students. If they don't have that, they just don't.
It's
We
a kind of,
we
it's an
demand
expectation, isn't it?
we demand originality at PhD level, but we never allow them to think or ask them to think. No, I think these discussions are very, very useful, particularly university level.
It's a shame in a way we haven't got any students here to see what they would think as well. I'm
Well,
assuming we haven't.
if I hadn't have been so swept off my feet, normally whenever I go anywhere, I had a meeting at 10 and I cancelled it. Well,
Oh, bless you.
I postponed it till later. If I'd have got organised earlier, I would have dragged my students with me. That would have been, yes.
We're running out of space here, but don't worry, I'll make sense of this later.
No, it's really interesting.
Yeah, spread onto the wall if you need to. Right, are we just about there? We got most of our post-its up?
Yep.
I was going to ask people if they could see a pattern. And I think, when the first one started going up, you could see a very clear pattern where the academic things were to the left, currently measured, but the personal and generic bottom right were not currently measured. The other thing is interesting looking at the colours here, where the things that are valued by others orange, so we need to read those to see who they are, but university leaders, not appearing quite so much in the top left. Although some of them, it looks as though they are measured. We've got a huge collection of post-it notes. You've been very, very productive here, so thank you, folks. What I will do is I will take these away with me, if I can get them onto the chart without all the post-its falling off, and try to type them up so that they can be circulated later and other people can see what the outcome of this little experiment was. But I think if nothing else, all of those things on the right-hand side of the chart are those things that are not currently measured. And it suggests that there's an awful lot, as I think we knew, without necessarily doing this, that people value, whether it's yourselves or other stakeholders, that are not currently measured, that we need to start thinking about and putting into the mix. I'm going to fast forward fairly rapidly now through the remainder of my information slides to give you some time towards the end of this session to have a think back at about where you want to go next with Learning Gain, if that's okay with you. So, RAND report, this is where we get into the nitty-gritty of how we might measure learning gain and what these pilot projects are doing. RAND report talks about two approaches, and it's the same as you get in any kind of assessment or measurement or testing, the proxies and the direct measures. And this is where they mention the revenue data, which ultimately I think the plan is that that will replace the Delhi data that we currently use. Tempting to use them because they're already there. It doesn't involve extra work or measurement. Okay, so two general types. And then they identified 5 different groups of measure: standardized tests, grades, self-reporting surveys, and these seem to be proliferating at the moment. Other qualitative methods, that was interesting, things like PDPs, which aren't really suitable for measuring learning gain in the sense that the government wants, but very good for those sort of one-on-one interactions between tutors and students. And then the mixed methods. And if you're interested in a case study of mixed methods, there's a YouTube link there to Wabash University in the States, who've been using mixed methods for quite some time with very large numbers of students and have had some quite interesting outcomes from that. So the challenges, and several of these have been mentioned by you already. We need to know why we're measuring learning gain, what's going to be included in it, whether it's the personal development, the generic skills, the academic, and so on. Complexity. We talked about comparability of inputs and outputs, you know, those A-level grades versus final degree class. Practicality, one that hasn't come up so far, but you could build a whole industry around this if you weren't careful. Unintended consequences. Once we have learning gain measures, and I suspect we will before long, the media will use them to feed into league tables, and universities will indulge in gaming to try and make sure they're as high as possible. Achieving buy-in. I think that's not necessarily going to be easy. Acknowledging the limits, well, we can acknowledge them, but again, will the media do so? Will students realise what the limits of the measures are when they're looking at data? And then validation. So I think this again is where RAND report, remember this was commissioned by HEFCE in collaboration with HEA and BIS, so where RAND has been very clear in its messages to the government about what the degree of challenge is. So the current projects. And these came as a direct result of that RAND report, the recommendations there. £4 million, so not an insignificant sum of money. Over 70 universities and colleges involved altogether, sadly not Sunderland. I did a quick calculation, it works out at something like £57,000 per university on average. You're going to have a chance to do some of this in a minute. They've got several months, if not years, and £57,000. You're going to get a bit of flip chart paper in 20 minutes. So I'm sure you can do it. Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Right, 3 main foci of the pilots. Employability, no surprise there. Academic readiness, confidence and skills, no surprise there. And suddenly, out of the blue, internationalisation. Where did that come from? But I've got an example of something that's badged internationalisation in my examples in a minute, and it's not quite what it says on the tin. Also, conspicuous bias absence, social capital, not in there. Although it could be part of employability, arguably.
It could be part of confidence. So those two are often
Yes.
rightly or wrongly.
Yes.
They often are.
Yes. But once you get thinking about the sort of old boys network, contacts, opportunities for, you know, internships and so on, It's that bit that's missing. Right, Lincoln were one of the universities that agreed to talk to... Oh, what's happened to my information on Lincoln? It's disappeared. All right, I will tell you about Lincoln. Maybe it'll appear later. I hope they haven't all disappeared, because I had some nice screenshots of the... Well, I'll just see what happens. I'll perhaps come back to that. Oh, look, they've all... I know what's happened. Somebody's put an earlier version of this up. I wonder if, guys, or Sarah, I wonder if we can just switch the version. This was the one that I sent through a while ago. I've got one on my data stick. Yes, I have. If you'd like to carry on thinking about the pros and cons of technology and learning, no, learning gain, we'll get this one up. Yeah. Was that yours? No, that was the one that Mel put in. That's probably my Zappa. I wonder why, because I was sure the version I'd sent you did have. Now I'll have to, hang on, I have to do something with this. Right. It's all right, it's got a security thing on the... No, that's all right. Worse things have happened in my... No, it's okay. There's no reason for this to be encrypted. I just don't know how to unencrypt it. Right, learning gain. There we go. Yeah, that explains why the animations and things went on there. Because remember I said to you that I had to do some cosmetic editing, and also I pulled the quotes out of your strategy and things, and I thought, where have they gone? Where have they gone? Here we go. Yay! Slideshow from current slide. Right. Right, I think we're there, folks. So this explains why my animations weren't working. It's because I sent a draft version through to Sarah a while ago, and I think the guys have picked the wrong version. So first one is, I missed that. No, sorry, Sarah, it's not. My lesson for me, don't confuse people by sending more than one version of your presentation. So, University of East London leading a small collaboration with Roehampton and Brunel. This one's focusing on academic skills specifically and engagement with learning. The three institutions are all looking at the same set of measures, but in slightly different ways. And in particular, they're using something called an academic behavioural confidence, or ABC scale. Have you come across this? You've got the reference at the end, but I've given you a little glimpse of it there. It's a psychometric test that looks at how confident undergraduates are in their anticipated study behaviours in relation to their degree programme. So it's self-report. A lot of these tools are self-report, and there are issues around the validity or reliability of self-report per se. But ABC has been around for quite a while. The version you see there, I think, is 2009, but I think it's an update from a 2003 version. So it's quite a well-established instrument, and it should therefore be well supported in terms of reliability and validity data. And it just asks students some little look-at-scale questions about how confident they are in various aspects of their studies. So that's what they're looking at. I think UEL is using this quite extensively across a couple of faculties at least. Roehampton is looking to, they're offering students who score low on some of the confidence measures some follow-up. And they're also looking at how well it correlates in terms of the students who engage with some of their support activities and extracurricular activities. So that's one of the pilots. They're also thinking about using this need for cognition scale, or a scale that measures how motivated students are to learn. And again, you can see some examples there of the sort of questions that will be asked. That one dates back to 1984, and I'm not sure if it's exactly this one that they'll use, but that's the classic need for cognition scale. You can see lots of mays and mights and thinking about. These pilots are at a very, very early stage. And so some of them hadn't even really established what tools they were going to be investigating. And you can see that this collaboration is only really at the early stage of that.
Am I right in thinking there's an American measure which is a bit like this, which is done at the beginning and end of degree studies?
Yes, there's one called MAP, M-A-P-P, and there's other one called CLA, I think, which I do mention further on. And there's one that's been used very extensively in the liberal arts colleges, which of course is a very different kind of educational experience to our degree programmes. Okay, so that's another one that's being looked at. Lincoln, finally. Lincoln are interesting because, rather reflecting our discussions earlier, they're looking much more broadly across the whole of the university experience, looking not just at employability development, but academic performance and engagement. And they're looking at 5 sets of data. Here they are. So a new, what they call situational judgment test, sourced from a graduate dilemmas test, and I've got a little bit of that, or some information about that to show you presently. Supposed to test for these generic graduate attributes that employers say they want. The second one is, again, a self-report. They've obviously got academic performance. They're going to be tracking that. I thought the student engagement was interesting, the fact that they already log levels of student activity in 6 key areas of extracurricular activity. So they're going to put that into the mix as well. And they're talking to their students' union about pulling in data from the sort of societies, volunteering type activities that students do. So this is a much more rounded look at that student experience.
So is student engagement in that project, or are you seeing it something which is extracurricular? It's not student engagement.
Student engagement with extracurricular measures in that, yes, yes. Because
Number 4 could be within number 5 outside.
yes, I think number 4 is it'll be a team within their academic services, professional services, who provide things like your Sunderland Professional Award. It's that sort of activity.
So it's not attendance monitoring?
No, it's not attendance monitoring. And I think there are other things that students can do with the Careers Centre, for example. So I got the impression, I'm just trying to recall the conversation I had with them, that they look at students who've expressed an interest, students who've then registered to come along, students who've attended the events, students who've completed, and they look at how far they've got through and how many of those activities. And I think we all get the impression that there will be a small cluster of students who just go for every opportunity that's offered, and there are some who don't go for anything. And often it's the strongest students who do sign up for everything, and it's the weaker students who don't do so well in their studies. But again, have we got the evidence to actually back that up? So that's, here's the graduate dilemmas. And I haven't got the actual questions for this because it's a commercial product, you have to pay. That's going to go down well if HEFCE decide to adopt those. But I thought what was interesting was the 5 key clusters of attributes on the bottom left: planning and organising, analytical thinking, achieving results, relationship building, communicating and influencing. And they've cheated by putting communicating and influencing in one there. Perhaps they do go together. And apparently it's used extensively in graduate recruitment by some of the blue chip companies. And then there's also the employability audit that was mentioned. This one was developed by Bolton as part of an HEA project. I got the impression that the Lincoln people will perhaps base theirs on this, but they will adapt it slightly. And I think there are some issues with this particular self-report document. It says things like processes, an ability to competently follow processes and procedures. And you have to choose as a student between I do not meet the criteria, I meet some, I meet all. Well, how many students are going to say I do not meet the criteria of being able to follow? You know, they may think they can. So I think that there's a problem with some of the way those are phrased.
They're not really criteria, are they?
Well,
Those descriptors are not.
no, they're not criteria. But that's, interestingly, up on the HEA website as a project output tool that people can use. I would be wary of it. Russell Group Consortium. Russell Group was interesting. This was a classic example of political manoeuvring by this mission group. I can say this now, I don't work for them anymore. Led by Warwick, 17 partner institutions. No, sorry, there were more than that. Something like, maybe it was 17 partners, yes. So 17 Russell Group universities put in a joint bid to HEFCE. How can HEFCE possibly not award them one of the projects, you know? It's a smart move. And actually, it's not one project, it's 5 projects. I think it says 4 on the HEFCE website, but another one seems to have emerged. I don't know how much money they got, but if the money was shared around equally, they won't be getting an awful lot of money per project on this, but I think they decided it was very important to muscle in on this game before somebody else decided for them what the criteria was going to be. Interesting, the focus is mainly on employability, but that's an area where the Russell Group have typically scored very well in terms of Delhi scores, which may be nothing to do with learning gain and a lot to do with reputation. But they want to make sure that that's up there because it will keep them high in the league tables. Not that I'm cynical or anything. So, these are the work streams, and I'm going to show you just a couple of those. There's not time to go through all of them. And you'll see this is the internationalisation one. Not internationalisation, it's about benefits of an international experience on employability. The Cambridge one is interesting. It's being led by Anna Vignoles, who is well known in the field, and I don't have any details on that one, but I think that would be an interesting one to look out for. So, the career readiness one. This is based on an award-winning approach that was developed in Leeds by Bob Gilworth. I think it's now gone to UCL. The clever bit about this is that this little self-report tool has been embedded into the registration process. So every student, every undergraduate at the beginning of every academic year must complete this little set of questions before they can register for their programme of study. So the data is very comprehensive. It's also done at the same point in time every academic year from pre-entry or at entry point at the beginning of each academic year. It's formative. It links into a whole raft of online and face-to-face support from their careers centre, who are very well resourced. And you can see there on the right, not the questions, but the links through to the support, depending on what responses the students give in terms of their career readiness. And it's all based around this premise that students can be at 3 different stages, whether they've made a decision about what their career will be yet or not, having made the decision whether they're then in the planning stage of how to get there, and if they've done the planning, whether they're actually out there putting themselves in the market, beginning to compete for that graduate job that they want. So absolutely, unashamedly graduate employment focused. Here's another one that they're looking at. Another questionnaire that's used by companies like Ernst & Young, looking at graduate strengths. Again, I couldn't see the questions because you have to pay for those, but they do give some sample reports on their websites, which lists these 60 different strengths, yes. And they're a bit like, if any of you have ever done things like Myers-Briggs questions, you know, it's that sort of thing. So again, I think, you know, an academic looking at this might question the validity of this type of psychometric test. But it has been tried and tested. It's been accepted by industry as a useful model, so it might have some mileage. Okay, the internationalization one. 7 of the partners are doing this. Each of them is going to look at 4 each of students who've done a study abroad experience, a work abroad experience, and 4 students who haven't done either of those but who've done something on campus which is meant to develop enhanced internationalization or global citizenship in some way. And Ellen Ed Jones, who is leading this project at Birmingham, said that the work they've been doing there leads them to think that you can get as good results with students undertaking activities on campus as sending them abroad for a year, which is interesting. Because if that's correct, then I think that's a very positive message for students who might not be able to afford to go abroad for a year, for whatever reason. Quite qualitative, it's all based on interviews, which again are a sort of self-report. Sunderland. Here's the quote from your learning and teaching plan. And I did ask you what you knew was already happening here. So maybe we've covered that question already. But it might be worth going and doing some finding out in the light of what you've seen. I don't know, where would you get this information from? How can we follow up on this? Certainly not up there on the website, but maybe that's something to have a think about, ask a few questions. It's possible, since the Learning and Teaching Plan, I think, was written in 2013, that all the work on learning gain has been developed since then, so it may be that Sunderland want to pause that piece of activity and wait to see what's happening more broadly in the sector. Okay. This is where I stop talking, and we have about 20 minutes for you to do something a little bit more extended, which is on the basis of what you already know and what we've seen this morning. You have a think about how you would like to see learning gain design taken forward. So when I said you've got 20 minutes and a flip chart sheet, I wasn't joking. Clearly you can't come up with a comprehensive design and pick tools and things of the sort that we've seen up there. But what would you like to see included? If you do know of some tools that might be piloted, what would you like to see piloted? And I ask this not just as a sort of hypothetical exercise. One of the people I spoke to when I was preparing this is Camille Kandiko-Hausen, who is the official evaluator for the HEFKI projects. And I said that I was coming to talk to you and that you'd put in a bid but had not been successful. And she was very clear that you shouldn't feel disappointed by that. Apparently, there was a very, very high number of applications for these projects. And she said that they couldn't possibly have funded all of them. So they looked for an appropriate mix across mission groups, across types of tool that were being investigated and so on. And she said her message would be to encourage any university to keep looking at this and keep working on this, because everybody can feed usefully into the pot at the end of the process. And I thought that was a good encouraging message, although you don't get any money to help you. That's the downside. Okay, So, if you could organise yourselves, I don't know how best to do it, probably in threesomes, because looking at the way you're sitting, it's going to be difficult to work in groups bigger than that. I will give each threesome a sheet of flip chart paper, and if you could sketch out on that some of your ideas as a group as to what you think the specification should be going forward. And again, I'll collect those in at the end and find a way of typing those up and getting them back to circulate back round to compare notes. Okay? How are you going? Are you going to turn around and crane your necks back there, or you want one sheet between the four of you? Could you pass that one back to the guys behind you? So see what you can say. Don't worry. No, thanks for coming. No, thanks for coming.
I'll join this group.
Great. Oh, they've got a bit of paper. That's all right.
No, I'll join Alison.
Yes.
'cause
What's
that
your
makes it
What's
three.
your role then?
I'm Director of Academic Services.
Oh, right. So, do you know Michelle Shoebridge, who was at Exeter? She was.
No.
Oh, right. Okay, because she was there recently as
No.
my head of unit when I was there. So.
Right. I knew
Yes.
Steve Chadwick well.
Oh, he was. Yes, I was telling the others that he used to have something on the wall in Exeter that said, because we were talking about different universities and who to compete with or not, and his alternative strategic aim was
Be
beat
better
Durham.
than Durham.
Yes,
Yes, I
he
know.
But
I
he's at
don't know.
Westminster now.
He's working as an independent consultant.
Yes, but I think he's got an interim
interim.
role at Westminster. So.
That'd be interesting.
Yes.
He's great. I've worked with
I really
Steve
like
since
Steve. I really like Steve.
I've worked with Steve since the 90s.
Yeah.
We were at Newcastle together, and then I
Yeah.
went to Durham, and then he
It's a
came
shame
to
he
Durham.
didn't stay at Exeter longer, but I mean, that's an ambitious place. And either you were absolutely of a mind with the senior executive, or you weren't.
Well, Steve is never going to be somebody to tell people what they want to hear.
No,
He'll tell them the truth.
no. And I think, yes, I think
I
you've hit the
gather
nail on
that
the head.
didn't, for I heard that from the third party. I'm sorry.
Yeah, anyway,
No, he was smashing.
yes. Well, hopefully I'll catch up with them again at some point. Right. Actually, whichever you like, whichever you fancy. Folks, do you want a piece of paper to put your ideas on? Are you all right working as a four? You'll be. If you want to do it as two twos, you can. It's just a bit difficult working in the rows. There you are. Thank you. You've got enough pens. You want another bit of paper? Yep. All right. Right, folks, you've got, I reckon, 10 minutes? 10 minutes to brainstorm this? Yeah, pick a group if you want to. Otherwise, don't mind particularly. It's just a bit difficult to do a design if you're trying to take all groups into account. But at the end of the day, that's what we've got to do as a sector. So. If you want to refer back to any of the earlier material, you can do. Oh, and I was going to give you... That's the information about the types of measure, the tests and the surveys and so on, in case you want to refer to it. Yeah, I've got them to share, and there'll be an electronic version for people who want to copy later. A couple of those for you to share in case you want to refer to that. That's just for you to refer to if you want to. It's the list of different measures, the tests and the surveys and so on. That's just as a resource for you to refer to if you want to. It's got those different tests and surveys and things on. A couple for you at the back. Oh, thank you. Do you want a spare one? Yeah. I didn't do enough for everyone because I'll send it round electronically later. Anybody else want one more going? There you go. couple more minutes, folks.
And there's also exactly what you said about that applies to this. Triggering the library thing. Sitting there.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely much more confident. And not sort of spend all night doing the work because I've got to by the deadline at 5 o'clock.
How are we going to measure?
How are you doing? Excellent. Can I stick it up on the wall down there? Just in the last few minutes, I want people to have a look at each other. Thank you.
And they are very self-motivated.
Anyone else ready to put something up on the wall?
But I still think we haven't bridged that gap between that
Interpersonal skills, that kind of stuff.
This group is obviously being challenged about committing to paper.
Coming up again.
I'm going to take it away from you and put it on the wall in a
I
minute.
think-
So you should do it quite quickly.
Do not measure it in its
I think that's so. I think we're starting to. I think in the group would be more of a discussion about whether it's worth even doing it at all, rather
Right.
than.
We can write that down.
I think that's what's ended up happening.
How would you do this? Because on the whole,
Folks, I know you've had very little time to do this, but before we stop, and I do want to stop promptly at 11, because you probably all need a cup of coffee now, I certainly do. I do want to give you a chance just to have a look at what's emerging from the different groups. So could I have your sheets? I'll put them up on the wall. And if you'd like to just come forward and have a browse, and if there's anything on the sheets that you want to query, find one of the authors of that particular sheet, and you can quiz them about their thinking behind what they've put. Okay. Was there agreement in your group as to what should? Interesting to see how similar they are. Are you ready to hand over your your sheet then? Thank you very much. Come and have a look at the others.
with our team to do this. We've been sorting out
bit of conflict within the group.
That's all right. That's
We couldn't
the whole thing's meant to
couldn't
stimulate
get,
some debate. That's
easy
fine.
agreement.
That's fine. And for anybody who might have been streaming in to listen to this online, we will type up these sheets and get them circulated so that you can see the outputs from the groups here.
It's quite easy to use, isn't it?
Yes.
It's
And
a
did you mention the J sample? Jennifer. Oh, well, I originally put Jennifer about it, and she said, oh, we're just not using it. And I said, well, I'll just keep an eye on what you're doing and see how it works.
James is doing a session tomorrow, I think, on it, isn't it? I know we use notes on rubrics.
Yeah, I think you should do it at the same time as well, actually, because there's one. But yeah, we're quite, because we thought as well, we wanted something to measure our students and refinement for what we're going to do. They'll do this like a shift with it, and then they'll go, where do you think you are on a scale of 1 to 10 of, I don't know, this, that, that. And in my head, I'm thinking, oh, that's brilliant. And the idea is, and they won't look at this in 3 years' time. I bet they find a bit of paper over again, so it's a complete waste of time. And they don't see the point of it.
Right, folks, if I could just have your attention for one more minute. Having generated a certain degree of chaos in the room now by asking everybody to stand up. That's all right. Do stay standing up. We're going to round up and finish now. Couple of takeaway thinking challenges for you over the coming weeks and months. Assuming that a measure of learning gain is coming in, and I'd eat my hat if it didn't, what might the implications be for your curriculum and teaching approaches? This is a whole other conversation that we clearly don't have time for today. One of the things that we haven't mentioned at all is how some of these other desirable attributes can be embedded within the curriculum and assessed as part of the curriculum. And I'm sure, like many colleagues around the country, many of you have been working to build into your learning outcomes and your assessment criteria ways of capturing, in a way that's appropriate to your discipline, some of these graduate attributes, whether it's communication skills or team working or critical thinking. And I think the way that degrees are assessed has shifted quite a lot in the last decade, or perhaps more even. So might there be implications there for you in terms of your teaching and curriculum? What could you be doing now to prepare for the changes? Have you already gone as far as you need to in terms of measuring those generic or transferable skills within the curriculum? And also, something coming rather more quickly, what will you want to see included in Sunderland's response to the technical consultation, which should be launched imminently? And if you were part of the group that helped to respond to the original green paper, you may well want to pick up the thread and have a look at what's in the technical consultation as well. So 2 bits of work, I think, that might be coming up for you that I hope today has been useful for in terms of giving you some more insight into what's been happening around the country, what the thinking is behind this. So on that note, I just want to round up for today by saying thank you very much for all your very active participation. It's been very interesting hearing your views. I hope you found it useful and enjoyable too. So thank you. Round of applause to you. And there are, when this goes round, you'll get the references that I used for this as well. So
Thank you so much for a stimulating session to really get us thinking about how we measure learning gain. Very valuable.
No, my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. It's been great.
And just before you all up and leave, there are more sessions running across the day. If you're interested in internationalisation and how we view that in the curriculum, Felicity's talking over in Reg Vardy at 412 at 12:30. There's a Lego session with some of our colleagues from in the room running from 1 till 3, and you may see some Lego people
I've got to go
teaching.
on that.
I've just